to be of use. The people I love the best jump into work head first without dallying in the shadows and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and to work in the row and pass the bags along, who stand in line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals or field deserters, but move in a calm rhythm when the food must come out or the fire be put out. The work of the world is as common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands and crumbles to dust, but the thing worth doing well has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry and for a person for work that is real. So I'll leave that with you, and you can maybe photocopy that for your buddies. I recommend you take a look at that, because one of the problems that you're going to have with this population is you're going to get tired and you're going to get pissed off, because they will disappoint you, they will let you down over and over and over again. So if you go in with an attitude that's remarkably different, and I just want to sort of start with a couple of really basic things. Put your hands together like this. This is kind of corny, but this is kind of key for me. The baby's brain is a disc about day 15. And this disc, your disc and my disc, becomes a ball like this. You got that? It's a disc that becomes a ball. Frontal lobes, hemispheres, you got to imagine their cerebrum in the back there. Okay, so you got this disc. Here's what happens. Put your hands together like this. Put your pens down. Everybody got their pens down? Put your hands flat and then do this. Come on. Put your chin and rub around the other side of your finger. Yes, make yourself look like an idiot. We're all laughing at you. Okay. That's alcohol on the edge of that disc. It's killed a few cells. Okay? It's killed a few cells on the edge. Now the disc becomes a ball. What have you killed?
The center of the brain.
Deep core structures of the brain. They're gone. They ain't coming back. Okay? They're not coming back. So it's a brain-based physical disability. Put your fingers together like this. Everybody in this room has a sandstone pyramid for a brain 99 floors high. You and I have an escalator that goes from floor 12 to floor 87. There goes from floor 22 to floor 57. Okay? Alcohol does two things. First thing it does is it eliminates brain cells. It kills individual cells. Here's how it happens. The cell wall is surrounded by alcohol. The alcohol is smaller in molecule size, seeps inside the wall, so now the cell wall has alcohol on both sides of the cell wall, and the doctors talk about, it's called cell death. The cell just, so it's not there anymore. Second thing alcohol does is brain cells are connected to the wrong place. So this sandstone pyramid, these are kids with sandstone pyramid with skylights. You got that? Now if you can remember the last minute and a half, you now know more about fetal alcohol than 99% of the psychiatrists in this province. This has not got to do with a bad mother. This has not got to do with breastfeeding. This has not got to do with being beaten up or living in the projects or living in West Vancouver. It's because mom was drinking, the baby's brain had alcohol in it. Now fetal alcohol also affects all of the other body systems. So you'll find all kinds of digestive problems, you'll find teeth problems, you'll find hearing problems. The problem with the brain is the brain is the one organ that develops from day 2 or day 3 until you're about 28 years old. Have you ever wondered why most of the people in trouble are under 30? Well, because the brain develops back here, that sophisticated grace, that discrimination, those fine moral distinctions. 25 years old to 28 years old is where they think the brain stops developing. I mean, there's a funny saying. Have you ever heard anything said politely about a teenager's brain? Well, it's not developed yet. So take a look at people with fetal alcohol. Their brain is missing pieces. Does that help you at all? And it's really hard because what happens is, and I get really upset easily, but these people are in court for breaking one of the rules. And then the judge says, well, it's unacceptable. We're going to do A, B, and C. And A, B, and C works really well for all of us. You know that. None of us here are likely to be arrested more than once. Or if you are, it's usually because you were drunk and did something really stupid. Usually around Super Bowl or New Year's Eve or your birthday or something. But here's what happens. When I'm in trouble, I have friends that say, David, get back in the truck. It's not worth it. David, get back in the truck. Okay? People with fetal alcohol generally don't have friends. The second thing that happens is, when I'm about to do something stupid, there's a little voice that kicks into the back of my head and says, David, if the Law Society finds out about this, you're in really deep shit. And you all have that voice. These kids don't have that voice. That voice is a sophisticated brain function that comes from back here and from up here. It's unbelievably sophisticated. So quickly, let's do a little bit of brain. Put your hand together like this. This is the snake brain, top of the spinal cord. Digestion, heart and respiration, and a few minor functions. Snakes have this brain. Okay, here comes the important brain. The next brain is called the dog brain. The dog brain is essentially, it's got a fancy name, skip it. That's the limbic system. And you got to remember that, because the limbic system, that's your emotional brain. So your emotional brain is not a sophisticated brain. On top of the dog brain, you have the cortexes. That's the chimpanzee brain. Now, chimpanzees are a lot smarter than snakes. The big development is this thing here called the frontal part. Some people call it the angel lobes. It's much huger than anybody else. And we got this other thing here in the back. So there's the three brains: snake brain, dog brain, chimpanzee, and human brain. Okay? Everything in court, and most everything you do, is aimed at the human brain. It's rational, it's cognitive, it's all that stuff. The overarching intervention of everything we do is called the external brain. Now, the external brain, you can read about it, but it's essentially a committee of good people to help out. What do? They stand in for the missing brain cells. Do you get that? Someone to make sure they go to appointments, someone to make sure that they don't go to the mall, someone that yada, 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 yada. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the interventions that work are in the limbic brain. Okay, so can I have that chair? And bring your chair. Oh, do you mind being a dummy? Okay, so please. My agent will pay you millions later. So this is kind of hard to get, but it's so basic because you know it all. And I'm going to assume that you're familiar with this book. Virginia Satir, every social worker is required to read it, and I know you all have one underneath your pillow. Written 30 years ago, read it again tonight, it's wonderful. And here's what the science is showing us. If, for example, just put your chair over here. If, for example, a client comes in and it's na-na-na-na-na-na-na, most probation officers, most lawyers, most doctors, da-da-da-da, that's one kind of way, okay? Move your chair over. I love these chairs, they got wheels on them. This is so cool. Okay? Now, I know this is kind of corny, but I want to make a point here. The point is that the limbic brain is the emotional brain, which means it's a relationship. If you can develop a relationship and be mindful that it's going to take many, many visits. It's not going to be like this. If you can have a relationship, and here's the beauty of the breathing. If you can, and I know I'm talking very fast because I started late, but if you can be here, what's your name?
Kirsten.
Good to meet you. You need to work on your handshake. Yeah. Good. Are you embarrassed?
A little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I'm too. But if you were to talk for a minute and work, you'll find that she will stop and breathe with you. And you can disguise it. I just had a really rough client. I just need a minute, okay? Just give me a minute. I just had a big lunch. I just need a minute. Whatever. And it takes about 30 seconds. Because two things happen. Three things. You calm down, and you all know the first rule of emergency. The first pulse you take is your own. Okay? Second thing that happens is, as you calm down, they will change their respiration. Anybody know about the mirror neurons? About mirror? The brain has got this marvelous capacity to mirror what's in front of it. And so what we're finding out in the brain is if I sit here and do one behavior over and over again, she will eventually start copying. So she will start to breathe slowly too. And here's the big one. You are modeling how to be with people. You are modeling relationship. As opposed to, let's go back here again. How much of their lives is na 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 na? Am I coming through? Okay. We're not finished yet. This is great fun. And there's lots of things you can do here. This is an undefended position. Okay? This, let's go back here again. This is not only defended, this is protected, and this is attack. Can you see the difference? Now, these things are not cognitive. These are much deeper in the dog brain. You coming through? Okay, so what we go back here again is, and this is where, as social workers, you know how to do this part. I'm just trying to tell you, this is the brain science. You look it up. Mirror neurons and the breath is the way in. Because at some point, if you keep doing this, eventually it'll happen like one of my clients. I know, I come into jail, you know, those explosive bolts on the door, and it's always scare me. And you open the door, you walk into this little cement room. But I got to the point where my latest client was this guy, and he was looking at 15 years. And we got him probation, which is a bit of a miracle. But anyways, would go into jail after a number of visits. I know. And that is a big success. That is a big, how long it lasts, I don't know. But I wanted it to last until he had his interview with the psychologist, with the reporting probation officer, and the moment in front of the judge. That's showtime for me. He sent me an email a couple weeks ago, and it seems that's the one thing he remembers. And I think that if he can develop that skill and the fear of going to jail for 15 years, he might stay out of jail. How are we doing? You seem a bit, you okay?
Yeah. Okay.
So what was it like just to be yanked out here?
It was a bit hard with knowing that there's a video camera.
Yeah? Is that hard?
A little bit.
Yeah. I think that's valuable information. I mean, she's a professional. She knows all of you, but it was a bit hard. Can you imagine what it's like for somebody that you see on a regular basis? I'm trying to get across the point that what we find easy, them is really hard. Does that help at all? And we could spend a lot more time, but thank you very much. You okay?
Yeah.
That's fabulous. Would you like to write down the name of a couple of books you might want to read? I'll pass them around. These are the two important ones. $12, it's thin. If you can't afford the book, write this down. Trying Differently Rather Than Harder. The best book on the subject, notice how thick it is. Okay, and we'll start that over here. We'll just take a look at it. It's $12. Make sure your office has a copy. This is a book for you, which has, this is like an encyclopedia by the same woman, but take a look at it, and it has all kinds of stuff in here for all kinds of reasons. If you go through this book, spend an hour, it will change how you do your work. It will change how you do your work. There's so much here that is so valuable. So I'll just leave you with those two books. This one's called Understanding and Application of Brain-Based Approach, a collection of information for parents and professionals. Just take a look at it, and you'll notice this is the second edition. You can notice all my secret markings there. But just take a look at this book. It's worth its weight in gold. Here is 30 years of longitudinal research, if you're interested. I now stand on a platform of some science. I'm not talking out of my earlobe. And this is a real problem. Because there's a lot of people out there who think, oh, it's like, this is like excuse of the month, flavor of the month. Here's some very good research on that. And if you want to, you promise to give me back these books?
Yes.
Good. Take a look at that one and that one. Now this is probably the most exciting piece of research that they've discovered. There's a CBC film about a teacher in Saskatchewan. She got all of the dregs in this one particular school, all the attention deficit problems, all the behavior problems. She was apparently a pretty good person. That's why they said, Judy, you take them. And there's a CBC film on her. She didn't know about the science. She's just a really bright young woman. And so what she did with these are kids who couldn't pay attention for more than 10 or 15 minutes. Well, somebody donated a treadmill to her, and she thought it would be a good idea if a kid was overacting in the classroom, she'd just go sit on the treadmill. It got to the point where the other kids in the classroom, when somebody was acting out, they just point to the back of the classroom. Well, she got several treadmills, and she found after about 8 or 9 months that she had solved the attention deficit problem. The science is from the University of Victoria. A guy named Brian Christie works in the lab there, slice and dice rats' brains. I'm going up to Iqaluit. You think you got problems? Iqaluit and Nunavut, they got problems. And so I asked Brian, phoned him up, what shall I tell him? And he says, you ready for this? It's simple. That's interesting. 20 minutes in the morning, don't make them sweat, don't make it competitive. 20 minutes in the afternoon, don't make them sweat, don't make it competitive. And he has a bunch of things about diet and fish oils and stuff like that. And he's finding out that, and he comes from speaking with rats, so he can back it up. Now it sounds kind of crazy, but in the last 20 years, anybody here have children in high school? 1, 2. How many people are close to 60 in the room? Just, okay. Do you know the difference now between high school now and high school today? There are 3 main differences. 1, there's hardly any phys ed. They've gotten rid of most of the music programs, and the libraries are now share 1 librarian in 3 or 4 schools. Kids don't get enough physical exercise. You want to see global warming? Here it is right here. We eat too much, all of us. Well, it has an effect on the brain. And what this research shows, this guy's from Harvard, and he put all the research together. It's a very interesting book, but at the end of the day, what the research is showing us is that exercise has a direct effect on the brain. So where does that come in for you? Well, just a suggestion. Who says you have to have your interviews in your office? Walk around the block. I don't know, find something to do, because what you're going to have problems with is how do you find ways to get into the brain? That's our job. How do we get into the brain? Everybody here, you can get into your brain. I can stand up here and recite numbers and ask you 30 seconds later, and you'll repeat the numbers back. Our clients don't have that facility. So I just wanted to tell you about that neat research. This is an unusual book that I recommend you read. Bottom line is the science says that peers have more influence on young people than parents. Now, it's not going to be well received. And when I was practicing, I used to make my clients who had children in youth court and make my clients who were going through a divorce, I'd make them read this book. I had about 10 copies of it. You get $20, you read it and you bring it back. This is a book that's well worth reading for a number of reasons. But think about that. Peers have more influence on behavior and a developing brain than parents. That's, I think, interesting. So what's the number one problem with people with fetal alcohol? A, they got no friends, so where do they go? They go with the other outlaws. Can you see what the immediate problem with that is? Most of my clients, if you ask them who their friends are, they'll give you a number of names of various people, usually street names for other kids. That's not a helpful peer group. And I'm quite blunt about this. I would never oppose a probation order that said no contact and then a list of names. Never. I think if it's a hard news thing to do, but I think that at the end of the day, if you have a number of people who are identifiable as less than positive, I believe a no contact order is a positive thing. And I'm aware that that's perhaps an unpopular position. It's much more difficult to find appropriate peer groups, but I think that's something that needs to be done. Lastly, I really would like you to read this book. Professor Bailey's in his 80s. He knows more about policing than anybody else in the world. Whether you're in Sudbury or Singapore or St. Louis or Sydney, Australia, this guy will tell you what a police officer does every day. And it's the first line in the book, it says, police don't prevent crime. Most people really don't know what police officers do. And this is a very helpful book because you'll understand what a police officer does. Because most of the people that we're talking about are involved with the police. And I know that's a lot of stuff to sort of have you take a look at. There's actually anybody here listen to CBC Radio? CBC Ideas did a wonderful 4-part series on Professor Bailey, and it's just amazing stuff. CBC Ideas. So you can listen to it. You can, yeah, an iPod kind of thing, yeah. So there's that. I could talk for about 5 days. I seriously could. Well, there's one other resource I'd like to mention. I didn't bring it with me. But we are fortunate. The best place in the world for fetal alcohol research and assistance is the province of Alberta. Assessments there are free. I had a client one time, it's a true story, charged with kidnapping his children, going through a divorce. Do you know why he took his kids to Alberta? So he can get a fetal alcohol assessment. He kept on saying, there's something wrong with my kids, there's something wrong with my kids, going through his divorce. His wife was an alcoholic, she denied it. So he takes his kid to Alberta, gets a fetal alcohol assessment, comes back, and it's a fairly radical way to sort of get your kids done, but there are a lot of good parents out there. And he was a longshoreman, wasn't the sharpest stick in the world, but he had a lot of feeling for his kids. The Asante Centre is in Maple Ridge. They have the best website ever, www.asantecentre.org, centre spelled Canadian-wise. And they have 2 resources that you must have in your office. One is a 900-page interactive text. And it's free and it's on the web, so you don't have to print the 900 pages. But it's by Crystal Beaudelet, speech and language therapist. How many speech and language therapists are there in the room? None? I just saw a whole bunch of speech and language stuff outside. Okay. Anyways, it's a book written by a whole bunch of us. Judges, lawyers, probation officers, but mostly by Crystal. And it's about people with fetal alcohol when they run into problems with the law. It's a huge interactive text, and there's a version for you and a version for parents. There's a reason for the difference. But it's an excellent, excellent resource. It kind of like is the state of the art of what we know and how we can be with people with fetal alcohol. The second one is a 35-minute video with Dr. Julianne Conry, C-O-N-R-Y, and the video is called Talking with Victor. If I had a one-day course, I could do a one-day course playing that 35 minutes. Mind you, we'd play about 3 minutes, stop, and we talk about it another 3 minutes. But it's Dr. Conry talking with Victor, talking with the probation officer, and talking with essentially the social worker, the John Howard worker. It's simply the best teaching video on fetal alcohol, and I recommend it, that your office have a copy of that. So those are some fabulous resources. I'm wondering if it might be better for you if I just answered some questions, or because I don't want to bore you to death. Anybody have any? Yes.
What I found really fascinating the last time I heard you talk was when you talked about sex.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, she mentioned she wanted to talk about sex. Not my favorite topic. I'm old and my sexual memories are from years ago. But there's a paper on my website called The Rules of Sex. I'm such a big believer because these kids get into 2 kinds of trouble. One is, usually, not always, but usually young women get used. And there's that whole industry out there, and you're aware of that. The second one, which is a bit more difficult for me, and it's not always, but it's almost always men, and they're almost always 25 to 35 years old. So they have fetal alcohol. So what emotional age are they? They're 25 to 35. What emotional age would you guess they might be?
13? 8.
15, 13. So who do 13 to 15-year-olds have sex with? 13 to 15-year-olds. Do I need to remind you that the criminal code is not happy with that? Yeah, it gets to be a very lifelong sentence. So when I was in Colorado, it was a bit like run over by a truck because this kid was looking at 15 years in the penitentiary. And the crime is no doubt a crime, but it wouldn't have been reported except for some other issues involving the marijuana trade, but that's irrelevant. The 2 rules of sex are quite simple. Only have sex with people the same age as you. Only have sex when everybody says yes out loud before you start. Now, as crazy as it sounds, I spent 6 months with a guy in jail making sure he got that in his brain. Because about a month before going to trial, the government sent in a psychologist who essentially decides what happens. Hence the breathing. The reason for the poem is to sort of remind you how hard you work. I'll tell you, I worked real hard for this kid. In the report, this psychologist, who has got a bit of an industry in this small town, thank you very much, and knows nothing about fetal alcohol, and is a bit of a neo-Nazi, just my opinion, writes this quite glowing report. And because the kid is in jail, and he knows other people are being interviewed by the same psychologist, so he hears all the bullshit in jail. Oh, I got fucked over. So he's been hearing all those stories, right? So we talk about breathing, we talk about the rules of sex over and over and over again. And of course, the report comes back quite surprised. This young man seems to understand the consequences, seems to understand the rules of sex. And it's like, and I think that yes, part of it is part of a game. That's what lawyers do. We like chess, we do all that sort of stuff. But also somebody has to tell those young men what the rules are. Because we don't talk about sex. We don't talk about it. The world is flooded with sexual imagery, flooded with sex. But no one tells kids the rules of sex the same way we talk about the rules of traffic. Okay? And I think we got to start that conversation. And when I was working every day in Hornby Street at Young Offender Court, I got to be a bit of a pain in the ass because I would see all these young girls. Remember Clark Park? Anybody here familiar with Clark Park? Okay. I'd see all the young girls arrested the night before in Clark Park. And I felt positive about what I was doing when I'd come into this. Yes, Mr. Boulding, I use condom. Yes, Mr. Boulding, I use condom. Because I was on a condom kick in those days, you know? But because I wasn't going to change their behavior. But you can maybe get them to use condoms. You know, so I think it's possible to do some education. And I think, yes?
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt.
Interrupt.
I thought I thought that Fierstein from Israel, Fierstein, Dr. Fierstein from Israel was instrumental learning, had been adopted in BC to work with fetal alcohol children. I thought First Nations had brought in his, with the elasticity of the brain that they could actually expand it. You don't know this.
One of the things that people like to talk about is called neuroplasticity. Okay? And it's a much more sophisticated it's not like plasticine. It's not like do this, do this, do this, whack on the head. Okay, now I'll just tell you to do it again. Neuroplasticity is a really big topic. And yes, it's exciting research. Can I tell you something about the brain? This is going to floor you. The brain is simply the most complex thing in our universe. The next thing in complex is so far down the ladder it doesn't make any sense. A couple of years ago, the Law Society brought in this hotshot to give lawyers a lecture. And here's what he said about the complexity. He says, I can give a patient one drug. I got a pretty good idea what goes on. Not perfect, but I got a pretty good idea. I give a patient 2 drugs. I sort of got an idea what goes on. He says, by the time I get to 3, 4, 5, I'm guessing. So we just don't know. And yes, there's lots of new research on the brain. And when someone comes up with this magic pill, this magic bullet, I got one word to tell you. Just, there's no magic bullet yet. You know? And yes, there's a lot of really promising research. And one of the problems with magic bullets is it tends to wipe out all the human work. Because I believe what happened here is where you're going to change the world. Where you're going to change the world is you develop a relationship with your client. And I just remembered something I wanted to tell you. On the web, on our web page is this article. It's International Journal of Law and Psychiatry, wrote with Professor Brooks. And if you have an intervention, I can't tell you what page it's on, but here's 6 words that I like. relational, relevant, repetitive, 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 rewarding, and rhythmic and respectful. Now I want to talk about two of those parts, and the one I want to talk about the most is rhythmic. Now there are rhythms in life, day and night, the 4 seasons, and people have their own speed, their own rhythm, do you know what I mean? And most of these people have very slow processing pace. Okay? I talk very fast. These people don't. So if you're going to sit down with, I forgot your name already. Kirsten. If I was to spend some time with Kirsten and I wanted to be a professional, I would breathe so I could slow down, so I could discover her rhythm. Okay? When you're dealing with people, rhythm is what makes people catch on. Am I making any sense to you? Like, rhythm is unbelievably important, and it's an area of communication that we don't think about. The rest of the stuff you guys know. And the last one is respect. These people have had a life of failure. They piss people off, they don't have any friends, they're not successful at almost everything they do, and you'd be surprised what a little bit of respect does. You'd really be surprised. And it shows up in the oddest ways. And here's where it shows up the most. Anybody here ever been to 222 to go to work down there with clients or anybody? Okay. Just one, eh? Okay. Rest of you are 2, 3, 4. Ah, Kirsten, good. Your murder charge or the bank robbery thing? What you'll see at 222 really changed my life. I kept seeing guys come out of cells into the dock in handcuffs. And they come out, and the sheriff undoes the handcuffs. And I watched how the sheriff and my clients would interact. They were quite close. And often you see like playful punches or just physical contact, kindness. And I realized that they had a relationship with the sheriff they didn't have with me. I realized that they were closer to the sheriff than they were to me, and I realized that they measured my legal advice against what the sheriff probably told them in the elevator. Okay? There's a bit of a problem with that, but the insight for me is that everybody wants to be seen and heard. I think that's ground zero. And these people aren't seen and they're not heard. So find a way with rhythm to get there. And there's a whole bunch of different things you can do. And you're all professionals. I understand most of you are in addictions. I have addictive behaviors. I don't know if you do, but I have lots of addictive behaviors. And I sometimes ignore them and sometimes I admit them. My addictive behaviors just happen to be socially acceptable. That's not true. I have a few that aren't socially acceptable. I like to steal logs from multinational logging companies. It's a big deal with me, but you probably wouldn't understand that unless you were from northern Vancouver Island. And we all have addictive behaviors. And one of the problems with addictive behaviors is we all have a very sophisticated cognitive machine that we can, if we make some decisions, we can do something about them. To me, addictions are behaviors that are just really hard to change. And I've not been successful at changing some of my behaviors. I sometimes lack an elevated, sophisticated professionalism in my presentations. It's because I have theories about people who are like that. And still, it's a bit addictive in me. I get a rush from it. And I think one of the problems that we forget with these people with addictive behaviors who are missing brain parts, how much harder it is. You know, because we use all of these cognitive skills. Like my presentation here, because you're all very normal people, is much more relaxed than if I was speaking at the Law Society. Can you see that difference there? And I think it's okay, because I've decided you're safe. So what I want to tell you about is the first thing you got to do. Kirsten, you want to come over again? And this is the hard part. This is the hard part. You're doing all your social work stuff. You're relational, you're respectful, you're rhythmic, okay? And here's the hard part. You want to see the brain. You want to be able to say, that brain's not like mine. What is that brain doing differently? And here's the clue. When you look in there, the first thing you got to say is, that's another person. And that's hard to do. You're all busy, you're all overloaded, you're not paid enough. I know that. and it's still hard to do. But this is so important. I want to give you a tip now to help you sort of go through that, but thanks very much. You might want to write this down. ALARM. We teach this to police officers. Write it down, like lengthwise. ALARM. A stands for adaptive behaviors. You can do that? Oh gosh, room is full of talent. A stands for adaptive behaviors. L stands for learning. A stands for attention. R stands for reasoning. M stands for memory. Lots of smart people in this room. So here's what you do. Let's start with the first one, because you probably have a little bit of difficulty with the first one. First one is adaptive behaviors. You don't go to a Jewish wedding and ask for a ham sandwich. You don't go to someone's funeral and walk up to them and say, so what do you think about the Canucks last night? Those are social skills. That's an adaptive behavior. You change. Okay, there are all kinds of adaptive behaviors. If the kid is hitchhiking in Saskatoon and it's 40 below and he's outside in a t-shirt, there's a problem. Probably with his brain and probably with the temperature regulation. If you see some behaviors that just don't make sense, it's a social skill. Everybody's worried about adaptive behaviors. Everybody here know the Vineland scales? VINE, land scales. Those are scales you give to parents and caregivers that tells what their social skills are. Well, everybody wants to do IQ. IQ is a waste of time. Adaptive behaviors. And the woman's name is Diane Russell. She's published a paper and she's written about it, adaptive behavior. She's a psychologist in Nanaimo. If you phone her up, she'll send you the paper. She's a wonderful person. So you want to check for adaptive behaviors. Square peg and round hole, social kinds of things. And when you see them, you'll notice them. Learning. Classic example. I'm not going to pick on Kristen, so I'll pick on the nice guy before you. Don't fight in school. Don't fight in school. Don't fight in school. What does he say? I wasn't fighting in school. It was on the way home. So that's, generalized specific kinds of learning things. There's all kinds of things about learning, and you'll notice that. And languaging comes up very quickly. Attention. Do I need to say, does everybody here know what attention deficit really is? What do rich white people call their kids when they don't want to call them fetal alcohol? We'll move on to the next one. Reasoning. Lots of reasoning issues. The main problem that people with fetal alcohol have is memory. Could be short term, could be long term. And memory is the foundation of all the other behaviors. If you can't remember what you were told, you know it's there. And what you will see is pain. Because these kids know and you'll see them. They'll tell you the story because I want to get the story because I got a police report. And there's gaps in their story. And I need to know where you were. Well, and you can just see the pain. And then sometimes what happens is they mask it, they get really angry at you, but you're familiar with that. So you're going to see all kinds of memory stuff. This quick check, I don't mean to make you a neuropsychologist, but that's what we teach the police. Just check it down, stuff like that. And it doesn't matter if you don't have a diagnosis. It's helpful. And if you need a diagnosis, the best way to get one is they're now free for people under 18 if you get one through probation. So if you have a client who has a criminal record, probably still has a probation order, you can get a diagnosis through probation. I talked to Audrey at the Asante Centre about 2 hours ago, and she said they've now unfrozen some money. So if you have someone under 18 with a criminal record, you can get an assessment. Otherwise, you have to pony up $5,000. But this is a good way to get at the problem. Yes?
This is kind of, you're looking at these people in terms of the same kind of terms as you would somebody with an acquired brain injury.
Exactly. Exactly. Because when I look at Kirsten, as lovely as she is, and she's a wonderful volunteer, I'm interested in the brain.
Would it be cheaper to just break the law to get the assessment?
Well, you're going to laugh as much as you think that is. I have in the past pled guilty to things I probably could have got them acquitted, but I wanted the services. I also want them in October and November, I'd like them to have a warm place to live. And they've already got a criminal record, and another 3 months in jail is, I'm sorry, they're going to get vitamins, they're going to have a warm place to live, and if I can get them services, I know it's ethically suspect, but I'm not the only one. There are some people who do well in jail. These people thrive on structure. People in jail can spot them. The problem is they also realize that they're not dangerous, and sometimes they'll kick them out. I've had clients who I've done that to, and I see them back on the street a week later. What are you doing here, Danny? They let me out, they let me out. Well, then you talk to the classification. David, he's not going to cause anybody any problem. We're double bunked in the gym. So yeah, does that help? I think jail's a good place for a lot of these kids. I'm sorry.
I just meant for the assessment.
Yep, then you can get an assessment.
Do you think it's always best that they know
Know what?
that they have?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the trick. This is a beautiful question. Here's the trick. When I talk to people, I work at being blunt and direct. Danny, you're like this race car, and there's something wrong with the steering wheel. And I'm going to get a bunch of people to help you because your steering wheel is not working. Danny, you're this big race car, and it seems like every 5 minutes you get a flat tire. Find a visual metaphor. Diane Malbin talks about it in the books that are going around. There seems to be something about the dog brain that likes visual imagery. Okay? And the science seems to say, you're going to love this part, the science seems to say that visual is best. Manitoba Provincial Court now has probation orders, and they've reduced them to icons. Next. Oh, you just... Okay, yes?
I just want to ask a question about ethics, because, I mean, the topic kind of comes up when you're talking about telling someone what they should do.
Yep.
You're not negotiating it,
Yep.
or,
Nope.
you know, and essentially, you kind of got to know yourself what's the right thing to do. Like, I mean, you
Yep.
don't want to
Yep.
give that power to the wrong person. Right? So, I mean, there is a whole
Yeah.
ethical thing about how do you approach this at a county.
Here's my story on that. Let's assume I'm a police officer. Let's assume I'm at a party. And let's assume that my wife, who I love dearly, has a brother who's an asshole. Okay? And let's assume that the brother has been drinking too much and is now going outside the house and going to get into his car. Well, I'm a police officer. I have a choice. I can go down there and I can do the police officer thing and, you know, have him arrested and impaired driving, or I can be the brother-in-law, say, Bruce, give me your fucking keys. I'm calling you a cab. And Bruce, you give me any nonsense, I'm going to slap you in the next week. Now, I heard that from police officers. So police officers have a huge amount of discretion, and I think that's the ethical question. The question is, and it's going to sound really goofy, is this person my sister or my brother? I think there's a time and a place when you see a child about to step into the bus, where you grab him by the scruff of the neck and you yank him back. And I think that when a person has a brain that's missing parts, for me the ethical problem becomes smaller. That may not be your solution, it's mine. And it took me a long time to get there.
I think it's not really up to me whether it's my solution or not. Many times it's up to my employer. And so, you know,
See, I disagree with that. I do. Because I've got these rules from the Law Society that are really quite rigid. Okay? And it took me a long time to say that, yes, those rules are important. I've had clients who are contract killers. They know what the game is. Okay? And I have clients that are missing pieces in their brain. And I'm sorry, I think the rules are different. I think the ethics are different. Because most of the people that get arrested for what we call the stupid crimes are missing parts. Here are the numbers. There's only one study done in the world about the number of people in jail with fetal alcohol. It was done here. And they came back with 24%. Dr. Conrays and Dr. Fast and all the other people will tell you there are some problems with the study. The number should be 40%. The Canadian Penitentiary Service has very quietly been doing studies, and they won't tell you about them, but I have friends who are in the prison system, and the numbers are coming back. 50 to 80% of the male penitentiary problem have one of these diagnoses. Let's be blunt. This is why I want you to read the book on the police. Police ain't catching the smart ones. The people we criminalize and put on jail, generally speaking, are not the sharp end of the stick. The people who the people in business use. Here's a classic story. What's your name?
Man.
Man.
Yeah.
Man, meet us behind the drugstore at about 12:30 tonight, and we'll give you $20 and you'll help us unload some boxes, okay? That's a client. See how quick that was? Give you $20, help us unload some boxes. The fact that it's the drugstore, it's behind the drugstore, it's 12:30 at night, sails by like seagulls. There's your client. Right there. Go through the reasoning. And I appreciate you asking the question, and I think you have to develop your own ethics.
Well, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but, you know, I've met counselors who I would question whether or not they should be given the power to tell someone how to behave. You know, certainly I can speak to my own practice, I can see other people practice, and I can say I have confidence in their practice, but I don't necessarily have confidence across the board.
I don't either. I don't either. I'm going to tell you a story about lawyers. Law Society publishes little books, they're called checklists for lawyers, and there's one on how to interview a criminal client. And mine was, I go to court every day with it, and it's a dog-eared copy, and I just check and make sure. And as of 2 years ago, the Law Society has a new category now. They say they say consider fetal alcohol. That's a huge thing. And I remember I was in court, you know, I had my thing there, and I'm getting ready to do my thing, and I'm good. And this very senior lawyer walks by and sees it there and says, oh, I see you're still using that. I said, yeah. I don't. And I said to her, I know. Clients are not good judges of criminal competent lawyers. You want to know who the best lawyers in town are? Who do the police go to when they're being done for assault with their wife? There's 4 or 5 guys downtown. That's not true. They've all become judges. So, good criminal lawyers don't wear the best suits. They don't pound the table. Did anybody here know Jim Bain? Well, he's just become a provincial court judge. One of the best lawyers you've ever seen in your life. The man has never raised his voice in 30 years of being a lawyer. And for years, if you had a client down at 222, the crazy crowns, you know, the mental health crowns, Jim, would you please? And there's a reason the Crown want Jim to deal with it. He's competent with a big C. And because with that competence comes a real clarity about his ethics. And he will say to Crown, drop this. Just, no, Patty, drop this. And if Patty wouldn't drop it, he'd take her to town and embarrass her in front of a judge. So Patty learned very quickly when Jim said, drop this one, or he said, Patty, he needs his meds. You know, so there are those lawyers around, and they're largely invisible except to other practitioners. But they are there. And you know, I can't apologize enough for the George Bush and Dick Cheneys and what's the crazy lady who's running this province now, Christy Clarks of the world. I'm sorry, it's a fact. Just cope with it. You know, because at the end of the day, here's the hard part. If you don't do it, who's going to do it? And that's the hard lesson I found. Because here's the problem today. The problem today is competent criminal counsel don't want to raise fetal alcohol as an issue because the judges think, well, it's horrible, it's a brain disease. Why don't we have to lock them up longer? Because they can't get the assessments. So it's not an easy ethical bind to get out of. And I appreciate you asking the question because that's the hard one. That's the hard one.
How do they assess? Do they do an MRI?
No. You can do an MRI, but it's not particularly helpful. It is very helpful, but that's another story. What they do, and this is very important, an assessment involves a psychiatric social worker, a GP, a pediatrician, a psychologist, maybe a psychiatrist, but unlikely, and it involves a speech and language pathologist. The reason we don't have assessments free in this town, in this province, is because the psychiatrists of the province of British Columbia want the billing code number to themselves. It's a multidisciplinary assessment, and the psychiatrists want it all. It's stalled in the billing code committee, and it's been stalled for 7 years. The bottom line is it's a multidisciplinary. Alberta solved that problem. So there's the politics right there. And what makes the multidisciplinary thing so important is you get all facets of the person. You know, and after a while you get really skilled psychiatric social workers and really skilled neuropsychologists and people like that. It's not a psychiatric problem. It's a physical disability. It's brain-based. And I realize I'm getting past the 4 o'clock time.
Does the mom still have to admit to drinking?
Yes and no. Good question. It's very helpful if the mother does admit, but there are other ways to get that information. Sister-in-law, brother, cousin, ex-husband. Small towns, who owns the bar? There's lots of ways to get that information. This is why skilled psychiatric social workers and other people, other ways of getting that information. Many women don't like the process because many people that do it, not the Asante Centre, are in the shame and blame stuff. And the Seattle people, anybody know about P-Cap? There's a program you have to know about. There's one name you need to write down. It's an email, FASLAW @hotmail.com. That's Kay Kelly, 35 years probation officer in LA, Kay Kelly, and her email is FASLAW @hotmail.com. She works in Seattle, and there's a program called P-Cap, P/CAP. They take an addict, they dry her out, and then they train that addict to work with 2 or 3 other women. And the program works so well, guess who's paying for it? The city of Seattle, because it cuts down on so many of their services. P-Cap, Kay Kelly will help you with that. Kay's a wonderful source of information, just wonderful. And that website, you should check out that website. If you Google FADU, fetal alcohol drug unit, it's number 2 if you Google it. It's at the University of Washington, enormous website, lots of information. Are we done?
Can I ask one more question?
You can do anything you want.
Is there any residential programs in Vancouver or in the Lower Mainland? I know there was one a long time ago. Is it still?
White Crow Village on Vancouver Island is an attempt at doing it. It's worth looking into. It's mostly a summer-based program. The answer is no. There used to be out of the Asante Centre, it was a very temporary situation. They had a bail bed situation where they had some bail beds available. The funding is gone. Sorry, there aren't any.
So, in your opinion, if there was to be a resource that was sort of in a house or something like that, that people could go and not for assessments, but actually live functioning with supports in place, would that be a useful way to do things, or are we better to keep people in their own homes? Like, what's the best way to do this?
The people I like, the people I speak to, want halfway houses. Because the people we're having the most difficulty with it's called 18ing out. Once you hit 18, you're on your own. Yeah. And so the idea is halfway houses, and there's a couple people, the people in Abbotsford, the religious people, what are they called? The Mennonites. They did something like that for a while. There's a couple being tried in Chicago, and there's a couple of others. But the people I talk to says that's the ideal environment. What you want is what's called an external brain. You want somebody there to do that sort of stuff, because many of these people, I'll tell you something, many of these people have PhDs, are welders, drive tow trucks, work in hospitals. So the whole spectrum of what we're talking about is when you get them in the groove, they like structure. And the fetal alcohol is a tremendous range. I've met a woman who's got a PhD. Mind, she comes from a very rich family, and they hired a lot of tutors. But she has a definite problem. I met this lawyer in New York who has somebody with him all the time. He has a hard time distinguishing between 2 minutes and 2 hours. So he's got time management problems up the hoop. But he's not stupid. He just can't focus. And so, again, quite a wealthy guy. But he's had this partner with him. His one job is just to, let's get back to task. He's a lawyer. He doesn't go to court, mind you. He does like the boring stuff. And I've met guys who are tow truck drivers. Now that's a skilled job. And not a perfect life, and severe problems. So the range is quite big, and there's a human being in there. You're very serious, ma'am, in the white sweater. You're very serious. You okay? Yeah? Anything else I can help you with?
People who have acquired brain injury can get an assessment at a place called George Pearson. Is that also, if you suspect a client has fetal alcohol syndrome disorder, that they can be referred there, or does it actually have to go to a center that specializes in fetal alcohol? Because nowadays I'm finding clients have brain injuries that may have been hidden and they have addictions, and they may or may not actually have fetal alcohol, but cognitively things are impaired.
It's hard for me to give you an answer. Okay? There are lots of people who've been trying to do that, so I doubt it. And I was just on the phone to Audrey at the Asante Centre, so I'm surprised that she has, because she talks about how difficult it is. I think there's a question underneath that's much more important. That's why I believe in this. Yes, it's nice to have a neuropsychologist and an interdisciplinary team give you that 20-page report. Yes, that's the gold, and that's important. But there are two things I got to tell you. If I break my arm, I'm a Canadian. I got to pull out my care card. I go to the hospital. I get fixed. No futzing around. Okay? We need somebody to take a fetal alcohol case to court under the Canadian Charter, under the Canada Health Act, and say, I have a health problem. I want a doctor. That's the first thing I want to tell you, and that's important. Somebody's going to have to do that, and eventually somebody will do that, and there are a number of people, judges and lawyers, who know that, so it's coming soon. I think the more important thing is, yes, it's nice to have experts, but there's a lot of smarts in this room. There's a lot of skill here. There's a lot of talent. And you know what? You don't need to be a neuropsychologist to realize, you know, Mr. Supervisor, I got this guy on my load, and I tell you, there's something not right there. And I've learned this, and I've read a bit, and you know, I think we got to do something because what we're doing is not working. I think there's a problem with the brain. And I don't care whether you call it acquired injury, autism, fetal alcohol, hit by a boot. It doesn't matter to me. To me, there's a person in there, and their brain is not like mine. And because their brain is not like mine, two things happen. They get overlooked. And because they get overlooked, they get frustrated, and all kinds of bad things happen. And then they are a square peg in a round hole. And then they get frustrated. Then other disabilities happen. Because the other disabilities that happen is fatigue, frustration, and all that neurotic stuff. But also all kinds, they get trouble with the law. They don't go to school. So all these other disabilities follow because they don't fit in. And so I think the issue really is, what's the brain like? Because yes, it's nice to be a neuropsychologist. But if you were to look at some of these materials, look at that video, read some of the stuff here, and it's going to take you some time, you'll be able to stand up in court or to your supervisor and say, I'm not a neuropsychologist, but just let me tell you what I have seen. And let me tell you what I think. And I've yet to find a judge not listen to somebody. The famous story is a probation officer in Kamloops who essentially said that. She stood up and said, I'm not a neuropsychologist. Radical judge. Hard-nosed, ex-prosecutor all his life. And she said, this is what we're doing, it's not working. And she mentioned some of the previous police reports. And she said, I'd like to try this, this, and this. And the judge says, whatever you want, I will order. Because judges want solutions. Your supervisors want solutions. And I think the trick is to see the brain, and here's the trick. Match the task to the brain. So if you have a plan, if you have an intervention, don't be speaking up here. Think about it. Dog brain, relationship, repetition, repetition. And
concrete.
Oh, concrete.
It does get into the hard drive eventually.
It does, yeah. What I tell people is, I don't have one here, but may I use this? Okay?
Yes.
Most business cards, let's say they're about this big. Okay? I tell people, if you can't write the probation officer order on the back of your card, stop, do it again. If you can't put on the back of the business card in your handwriting what you want done, stop, do it again. Because that's where their brain is. Yes?
A lot of these kids that have got FASD, they end up in that class that you talked about at school for the back.
Yeah.
Is anything being done with the teachers that are teaching them classes?
Yes and no. There are two fabulous resources, and one you might want to write down. It's called Deb Evanson, Evensen. It's published by the Yukon government. It's a wonderful book. It's available free online. It's called Making a Difference. Download it. It's fabulous. Will help you in your practice. Alberta's got a lot of money, and so does Saskatchewan. Both of them have published online detailed FASD curriculum K-12. So if you want that, FASD network in Saskatoon. Well, I don't happen to know the website off the top of my head, but yes, there's quite a bit of work. And there's a woman, her name is Tina. She married my friend Danny, and what's her married name? I don't know her married. But the Surrey School Board has just hired a coordinator. And don't know her I'm just blanking. Her name is Tina. She works for the Surrey School Board, and she's doing this stuff. And she's also doing her master's. She's really quite brilliant. But yes, people are slowly doing it, and they're smart enough to start young. The bottom line is, the younger you catch them, the cheaper it is. Because by the time you're 25 years old, the cost of somebody putting in a penitentiary, we would love to have as a wage what it costs somebody to put somebody in I would. I don't know about you. Maybe you guys are all overpaid, but I'll take the 86 to 120 grand a year. That's what it costs to put someone in jail. I think we're done. Okay? Thank you.